So today we're going to be taking a look at creating a composition using basic shapes and basic colors. We'll do a more advanced variation of the same design on our next video, but take a look at how we build out a simple composition. I'm going to start by creating a new file. I go over the top left side navigation. We're going to pick out just a standard letter size document, 8.5 by 11. We're going to keep it on RGB color just for a little bit more vibrancy. And we're going to keep it on a vertical orientation. I can click create. To begin, I have my background layer. You can build on the background layer, but just to get in the routine, I am going to create out individual layers for each of my layers needed to build out the composition. So I'm going to go down to the plus sign, down the bottom of the layers panel, and I'm going to name this layer sky. And go over to the middle of my left side navigation and click on the paint bucket tool. For the paint bucket tool, I'm going to pick out a light color blue, something of a more sunny day. And again, we're using just basic colors, so we're not going to get into gradients for this variation, but we will attempt that later on. So I'm going to use my paint bucket to simply click inside the area. I can manage my color over on the top right side in the color panel. When I click, we get filled in with a light blue color. Then I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to rename it ground. This time over on the left side navigation, I'm going to click on the rectangular marquee tool. And about a third on the bottom end of the paper, I'm going to click and drag to create out a rectangle. With this rectangle, I want to fill it in with more of a green color. So I can adjust over on the color panel over on the right side navigation, pick out more of a green. And again, using the paint bucket, filling in this area. The reason why I am creating on these separate layers is just to keep everything organized. If I mess up on an area, if I need to redo something, it's very easy just to throw away a layer or edit that layer without affecting anything else. Next, we're going to create out a layer for sun. With the sun layer, I'm going to go over to left side navigation, click on the elliptical marquee tool, click and drag, and if I want to drag to get a perfect circle, I can hold down shift to make sure it locks in as a perfect circle. I'll change out my color to more of a yellow. Click inside the area. We'll create out a new layer, and we'll name it cloud, and I'll call it 1 for now. We can always get into creating out individual layers later on, but I'm going to, before drawing out a cloud shape, I'm going to deselect from the sun. You don't have to. As soon as you start drawing out with the elliptical marquee tool, it will eliminate the last selection. But this time we're looking to draw out more clouds. We're going to actually be combining the ellipse tool with several other oval shapes. To begin, I'm going to draw out one oval. I want a more wide oval shape, so I'm not going to hold down shift. But once I have the one, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, Alt on a PC, Option on a Mac, the Shift button. With the Shift, I can look to combine these circles into one piece, and you can see I'm just overlapping over certain sections. I can do small circles just to give the little lumps in the cloud. But once I have a cloud shape, I can look to fill this in. The paint bucket, I'm going to pick out a standard just white color, click inside the area, and now we have it filled in. If we want to add in more clouds, the clouds are not likely going to have the same shape. So I'm going to create out a second layer, and I'll call it cloud 2. We will take a look at how we can get into duplicating out some of these clouds, but we do want to create some variation overall. So I'm going to click and drag outward, begin overlapping, creating out some more cloud shapes. Once I'm happy with the shape, again, over to the paint bucket, click inside the area. Then I can Control D, deselect, or click on deselect on the pop-up. But if I want to look to create out more duplicates of these clouds, I can look to simply hold down Alt or Option to click and drag and create out duplicates. If I just simply move my cursor over top, holding down Alt or Option, you'll see that your cursor will change with this double arrow, black arrow, and white arrow overlapping. This means that we can create out duplicates of anything that we click and drag on. So if I wanted to have some clouds in the distance, or if I wanted to show more range, I could look to scale down some clouds, hitting Control or Command T, brings up the transform tool, and I can look to scale it down. If I want to flip it around, I could always look to right click on it while in the transform tool, and I'm going to flip it horizontal, just so it doesn't look like the same exact cloud as the other. Same thing, I'm just going to look to flip, and I can hit flip horizontal. It just gets it facing the other way, so we're starting to fill the sky with a couple more clouds. You can always add in more clouds as well, but this is just giving us the basics of building out a standard, simple design. Next, we're going to look to create out a new layer, and I'm going to actually create some mountains that are going to go in the background. So I'll call it Mountains Layer. This time we're going to be taking a look at either the regular lasso tool or the polygonal lasso tool. If looking at the polygonal lasso tool, it's clicking point by point, and you can create some jagged edges, but it's all a matter of where you're clicking to help build out the overall shape. I do want to make sure that I go past the green in the ground. This way, when I do fill this in, I'm eventually going to put these mountains behind my ground layer. So I can look to fill this in. I'm going to pick out more of a gray or brownish color that sits in the background. And again, using the paint bucket tool, I click inside the area, and then I can deselect. Again, I do want to move these behind my ground, so I can go over to the bottom of the layers panel, click and drag this down below between the ground and the sky. That gives me some nice mountains in the background, helps to build out the landscape overall. But if I do want to add in some other layers, I'm going to put in a second variation of mountains that are going to sit in front of those. Call it Mountains 2. This time this will be more closer to us, and just to show the difference from the polygonal lasso tool, where you're clicking point by point, the regular lasso tool, you're drawing freehand. So it's all a matter of how steady you are with the mouse. But if you accidentally slip, you may have to restart and redo. So if I accidentally slip, I can let go, hit Control Z, and then begin again. So that's where some people prefer to use the polygonal lasso tool, giving them a little bit more control. But if you take your time, eventually, again, we do want to get all the way over to the right side. And again, I'm going to go a little bit past the ground and then get back to where I started. This time I'm going to pick between the grayish and green color. So it's sitting in the background, but in the distance. And again, using the paint bucket, I can click inside the area. If I don't like the color doesn't really stand out enough, I'm going to darken this up a little bit, just so we can get this in the distance. And then deselect. And we see that over in my layers panel, the ground is sitting on top of these, so it helps to make sure that we're clearing out the bottom of a rough edge. So we have mountains, clouds, sky. These elements were really more towards the background. Now we want to think about the foreground. If I'm thinking about basics, I can imagine that this is going to be a camping type of composition. So I'm first going to look to build out a tree. I'm going to scroll back up to the top of my layers panel, and I'm going to create out a new layer. I'm going to call it tree trunk. There's many different ways of doing a tree, but we're likely going to be using a combination, again, of either the polygonal lasso tool or lasso tool. Starting out with the polygonal lasso tool, I like it because it gives you the ability to have a little bit more control of drawing out roots or getting straight lines on the trunk of a tree. But we're going to be drawing out the trunk and the limbs of the tree, not adding in the leaves. I'll put that separately on a different layer. So to build out a tree, I'm going to start by clicking point by point. And you can see on my cursor, as I add in multiple points, it can give me the look of a curved shape. So if I want to put a branch off to the side, just a matter of clicking a couple points to add in as I get further up. I'm going to start to think about how branches are going to be breaking off, even if they extend outside of the actual document. Be careful not to click too quickly, or else it may automatically connect back to where you started, and you'd likely have to restart all over. So I was going a little bit more in detail, trying to get the limbs to look as realistic as possible. You don't have to go this accurate, but think about how you can visually get something that looks like a tree limb for your design. And we'll do one more limb. But as I get down and finish up with the limbs, I'm going to start to go back down and give a wider bottom of the trunk so it looks like it's blending into the ground. Throw in a couple roots, or the idea of roots. When I get back to where I started, you can click on the starting point, and now we have the shape. I can start by looking to fill it in with just a brown color and go over to the orangish section and drop down the orange color to get a brown, and simply click inside to fill in that space that was drawn out. I'm going to slide this over slightly, but we have this tree. Now we're going to look to place in some greenery on top of it. And I'm going to use the same process as we did for the clouds. I'm going to create out a new layer. I'm going to say tree greenery. Or leaves. I'm going to deselect, then go over to my elliptical marquee tool. I'm going to start drawing out some circles, particularly over the areas of which the limbs are. You can use smaller circles so that they look like they're appearing over top of the limb area. It doesn't necessarily have to be full, but if you want to make it full, you can start to add in bigger circles that cover some of the limbs. And these little circles help to give the sense that there are bigger clumps of grass or leaves and then smaller clumps of leaves as well. So if I want to test it out, I can go over to my paint bucket and pick out a green color, trying to get a little bit something different than just the grass and something different from the mountains. I can use the paint bucket to fill in that space. I can deselect. We see with the first type of tree, very straightforward, just using these little circles to help give that greenery. I'm going to do a second type of tree, more of a pine tree. I'm going to rename it. Again, I'm going to look to draw out the trunk first. So with relatively the same process. You can always scale down or scale up the tree sizes. So don't think that you have to necessarily make it too large or too small. But because we're going to have a lot of greenery for this one, I don't necessarily have to go crazy with drawing out the limbs. Most of the trunk or bottom portions of this tree will be blocked out. So once I have this area drawn out, again, I'm going to look to fill it in. I can even just use the eyedropper tool in the left side navigation to match the brown from the original tree. Paint it into the area. And again, I'm going to create out a new layer. Find leaves. This one I can either use the polygon lasso tool or use the regular lasso tool. If using the regular lasso tool, just take your time with it. I'm going to try drawing out a clump where it comes jutting in and out as it climbs higher and higher on the tree. I'm kind of just letting my hand unevenly come back and forth down the tree, so we're creating out this width. And if I'm not liking it, if I'm not really seeing it overall, I can always go deselect and use the polygon lasso tool. So this is where I can get into simply clicking point by point. And don't be afraid to look up references, get ideas of what the tree might look like. It's kind of going off my memory. And sometimes you forget. Sometimes it doesn't look as good as you probably could if you had a reference. So take your time. Use references, but have fun with it. If you accidentally, again, do click too fast, it can end up joining back to where you begin. But I can always hold down Shift to add in the selection. So I can still continue to create a selection and build out and finish out my tree shape. But if you do mess up, you can always hit Control Z. So again, just using my hand with the regular lasso tool. If I'm not getting the shape I want, I could always use the eraser tool later on to try cleaning it out. I'm going to go over to the paint bucket. Again, I can use the eyedropper, match the green that I have from the other tree, and paint inside of this one. I can hit Control or Command D, deselect. I don't like it overall, but I can always get into scaling it, modifying it, making it a little bit bigger. Use the move tool if you need to adjust the location. And if I do want to clean up some areas, I could always use the eraser tool. Eraser tool, left side navigation. I'm going to shrink my brush down a little bit. You can always use the right bracket or left bracket to adjust the size of your brush. If I tap on the left bracket, it gets smaller. Right bracket, it gets larger. But I'll go very small so I can get the crevices, and this way it gives me some of the leaves projecting a little bit upward, so it looks a little bit more tree-like. Before it was a little bit too smooth overall. This gives me that rough end to make it more of the shape. So just getting both sides of the tree, again, just sharpening it up, adding in a couple of little branches that are sticking up or leaves that appear that the tree is not just so flat. But you have a couple different variations of trees. If I do decide that I want to move them around or adjust, I can always move the location, whether I want to play with the perspective or make an object appear as if it's further back. I can move the layers of the pine tree behind my original tree trunk, or adjust the location of my original tree so it's more in the foreground. What you have to be careful of, you can see that the green is overlapping with each other. If I do want to adjust the green on the branches of the pine tree, I go up to Image, Adjustments, and Brightness and Contrast. This will allow me to be able to brighten up the tree so we're seeing different shade. So when I do now look at the trees, they're not necessarily overlapping or getting muddled together, but they're showing a little bit of difference. Other elements that you can consider putting in. I'm going to create a new layer out. And I'm going to call this river. With a river, again, you could use the polygonal or regular lasso tool. I'm going to use the regular lasso tool and use perspective to create the sense that it is fading into the background, that's going off into the distance. So if I look towards the horizon line where the green meets the mountains, I'm going to click and drag to kind of create a wavy line as if it were traveling down the river. I'm going to move off to the right side, so it's going to show the thickness of the river where it gets wide and then starts to narrow as it goes into the distance. I can look at the perspective that's going. We're going to just keep getting smaller and smaller as it fades away into the background. Once I have this, we can look to fill it in. I'm going to go over to more of a blue color, or darker blue area. I can use the paint bucket, click inside the area. Now we have some water. The last element that we're going to look to put in today is a tent. Using basic shapes, we can use the polygonal lasso tool to help draw out trapezoidal or triangular shapes. I'm going to create out a new layer. I'm going to name it tent. If I'm imagining a tent, I can think of the more triangular shape of an entrance for a basic tent shape, which I can click a point, move upward and to the right here, and I'm going to go back down and then close up this object to make it a triangular shape. It is off a little bit on the bottom because I am going to try creating the sense of depth, that it's not just a flat front view of a tent. But I'm going to look to pick out a new color. I'm going to pick more of a tannish gray color for my tent. I can look to fill it in with the paint bucket. Once I have the front of the tent, we will create the opening in a moment. I'll go back over the polygon lasso tool, click a point at the top. I'll go down to the side and just making a more narrow tent that gives an opening for our tent. So I can fill this in with black so it gives a sense of an opening. And understand I am currently on the same layer. If you choose to put it on the same layer, that way it can stay together. Just understand that you are putting it on the same layer. If I wanted to create out a new layer, I'll call it tent opening. I can then click inside, filling it in with space, and then Command or Control D or hit deselect. Next, I'm going to use the polygon lasso tool to draw out the side of the tent. With the side of the tent, yes, it is going to cover up a little bit of the tree in the background, but it's giving a sense that it is in the distance, or going in the distance. I'll pick a similar color to the front of the tent, using the eyedropper to match the color, but I'll put a little bit of shadow so that we can tell that this is the side of the tent. So I'm going to create a new layer, call it side or tent side, and again use the paint bucket to fill this area in. Other little details that you can consider: if I wanted to add in, say, strings to make it look like the tent is tied down, I'm going to create a new layer. I'll call it tent ropes. And I'm going to go over to my brush tool. The brush tool is the 9th icon, left side navigation. Right now my brush is quite large and the color of it is matching to the tent. I'm going to change it over just to a standard black color. But I'm going to reduce the size of my brush. You can see I'm reducing the size up in one of my clouds right now, making it very narrow. I'm going to look to click a point at the top of my tent and move it off to the side to give the sense that it is traveling or being pulled and taut. To be able to draw this out, When we click on the top of the tent, I'm going to click a point and then move my cursor down to the ground area. I'm going to hold down Shift first and then click. It automatically makes a connecting line from point A to point B. Looking at it, it was a little bit too thick, so I'm going to reduce my stroke just a little bit more. And again, I'm going to repeat the process. Top of the tent, click a point. Then I'm going to move my cursor out to the side of the tent, hold down Shift, and click a point. So it gives us that rope effect. I can repeat the same process over on the other side. I'm going to click a point on the top, move my cursor out to the side, hold down Shift, and click a point. So it's just thinking about the little details that make this look like a tent. I can repeat it on the back side as well. And we don't need to do the other side because that would be blocked out. If you want to think about other details, I can think about a little fire. I'm going to create out a new layer for my firewood. Go over to my rectangular marquee tool. Just draw out a standard rectangle. We don't need to go complicated with the shape. But with a rectangle, I'm going to fill this in with a brown color. I'll go more of a lighter brown. Use the paint bucket and fill this space in. I'm going to deselect. And I'm going to hit Control or Command T, in which I can get into rotating this so it's not just a flat shape. If I want to duplicate it, I can click on the Move tool, first tool, left side, hold down Alt or Option, click and drag to create out a new one. I'm going to hit Command or Control T, again to rotate it so that it's a crossing of the two pieces of wood. And I may want to darken up one of the pieces so we can see that it is different. If I want to darken it up, I'm going to go up to Image, Adjustments, and Brightness and Contrast. And I can either brighten it up or darken it up, reducing the brightness. If I want to rotate them in any way, I can always again hit Command or Control T, just rotate it as needed. And then I'm going to create out a new layer for my fire. If I want to create out a fire, I'm going to start with the bigger, wider flame. I'll go over to my lasso tool. It's a little bit more free reign. I'm going to click and drag to create out the flame element where it gets sharp on the top points. Take your time with it. If you're not comfortable with the regular lasso tool, you can use the polygonal lasso tool. But I'm going to fill this in with a orangish color or orangish yellow and use the paint bucket to fill in that space. If you don't like the color, you could always change it. If I want to make it a little bit darker, again, just click inside the area. Then I'm going to, again, Control or Command D, deselect. I'll also put a little flame on the inside, more yellow. Kind of following the same shape, but a little bit more basic. I'm going to put a more yellow color on the inside. And use the paint bucket to fill in that space. Finally, we now have a basic scene, seeing a tent sitting by the river with a little mountainous background and a sunny day. In our next video, we'll take a look at how to add in details and how to turn a basic design like taking a camping site image and turn it into something a lot more realistic. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time.